Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live. He just might be the busiest guy in media these days. From news anchor to rising media mogul, we speak with Emmy-winning founder of OZY Media, Carlos Watson, on his new podcast, his new talk show, and his new scripted project for Lifetime about a mother and daughter separated at the border. That and more coming up. Hello, I'm Caroline Fairchild, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. It's Tuesday, October 6th, and here's a quick look at the top stories that are trending right now on LinkedIn. President Trump heads home after spending the weekend at Walter Reed Medical Center for treatment of COVID-19. Trump's team of doctors said on Monday that the president had been fever-free for 72 hours, yet, quote, may not be entirely out of the woods yet. In spite of his infection, he removed his mask before entering the White House. And while the economy may be recovering, what's it going to look like? Well, it may depend on what you do for work. Workers linked to the new digital economy in certain cities are proving resilient, if not growing, while low-wage workers tied to tourism and large gatherings are in a deep decline. This is according to a Wall Street Journal report. Yet not all is rosy for tech workers. The rise of remote work means many tech giants are considering pay cuts for their employees, reports Bloomberg. Facebook, Stripe, Slack, and VMware have all said they'll give pay cuts to workers leaving San Francisco and New York City to work elsewhere. It's unclear how many others will follow suit. For more stories like these, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed, or if you're in mobile, click into the search box. We've been polling professionals on the LinkedIn news page, and we want to hear from you too. And today we want to discuss the changing state of media. How have your news consumptions changed during the pandemic? What types of news are you reading most? A, are you focused on industry news? B, world events and politics? C, leadership and management? Or D, other? Let us know in the stream, share your vote, and we'll reveal the results of the poll at the end of today's show. Because of the pandemic, many people are consuming more media than ever. In a recent Nielsen survey, 47% of workers said they had watched or streamed news that day, and many cited that they have more time to do so because of work from home. Well, that works out well for our guest, Carlos Watson. He's the CEO of OZY Media, and he's meeting that demand and then some. OZY has gone from a digital magazine to recently announcing its first scripted show in just 7 years. Carlos Watson joins us now. Carlos, welcome to LinkedIn News Live.
Hey, Caroline, good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I want to start out by congratulating you on your Emmy for Black Women Owning the Conversation. Tell the viewers in the stream, what was the impetus behind that show?
In 2018, we had a lot of our audience who were reading OZY online say to us, hey, there's such transformative conversations happening in the country that OZY should get out and about. And so we did a series of town halls around the country. But rather than do the classic thing, Caroline, where you gather kind of a group of people in Ohio or somewhere like that, and it's kind of a forgettable conversation, we decided to go deep in where some of the passion points were. And so we talked to Black men in Baltimore, we talked to white women in Nashville, we talked to Latino families in the Bronx, and we talked to Asian American millennials in San Francisco. And at the end of that show, which ran on PBS, we approached Oprah Winfrey and told her a little bit about what we were doing. And she said, love the idea, but I want you to focus on Black women. I often feel like they are the least heard and maybe have some of the most insightful voices. And so we built out a show, a town hall show with 100 Black women talking about a whole variety of subjects from motherhood to life to happiness to health. And it was an incredible set of conversations. And obviously we're honored to get the good news about winning the Emmy last week.
And it really is such a powerful show. And like so many of us, we've had to switch now during this pandemic to doing things like this in a remote setting. Talk to us a little bit about how you did that with this show and how the tone and the topics changed.
Yeah, as soon as COVID broke out, the president of the Oprah Winfrey Network, Tina Perry, said to us, if ever this conversation was more needed, it's now. And so she asked us to figure out how to do it in a COVID environment. What we ended up doing, Caroline, was having about a dozen women join us remotely. So unfortunately, we couldn't be together, which is what had made this so special. But I will tell you, even at remote at a distance, Caroline, people were open, they were candid, and people were struggling. Remember, this was the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So this was kind of in April, May, and people were wrestling with family members who passed away. Many of the women on the phone were essential workers, and so it was tough for them, and they were relaying their experiences. People were talking in some cases about loneliness. So as people began to quarantine, some of the women were on their own, and it became a real kind of communal kind of sharing sort of situation. And so what started out as a show we were filming really became kind of a family meeting. And I was proud that we were able to do several of those, and hopefully those were valuable and helpful as well. So like you, we've had to, and like everyone, we've had to adjust to this unusual time.
Well, I think it's so important, the work that you're doing. A recent McKinsey survey found that Black women are more likely than any other worker right now to be dealing with the loss of a loved one because of COVID-19. So those conversations are so critical. What are you hearing from viewers? What are they saying in terms of their impact seeing this on the big screen?
I think a couple of things. One, I think, is that we are going through lots of cycles. So even this last 6 months, I don't think it's all been one thing. I think a lot of us came into it hoping that while things were bad, it would be this way maybe for 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks. And then as time moved along from the spring to the summer to the fall, and as the numbers of deaths and of sickness and of concern mounted, job loss as well, I think things have changed. So I think from almost everyone I hear, it feels like we're in a transformative moment, Caroline. It feels like, I often say that we're at the beginning of the new 60s, that like in the 60s when there were big debates about race, about gender, about love, about work, about capitalism. Like, I feel like all of that is starting afresh. And you see everyday people as well as some of our leaders beginning to engage in that conversation in earnest. So that's a lot of what I feel like in one way or another I hear as I talk to our various viewers, listeners, and readers in the OZY world.
Well, speaking of viewers, I want to go ahead and say hello to the members that are joining us in the stream right now. Dolores from Texas, Martha from California, Andrea from Florida, Carolyn from Washington, D.C., and Thomas from Mexico. Big group. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. I'm here with Carlos Watson, the CEO of OZY Media. You mentioned that you feel like they're almost like kind of in the 60s again, but I want to hear, how are you growing your media business during this time? It's a hard time to grow, but you're doing it. What's working?
Yeah, I guess I feel like part of it is that we've been listening and learning a little bit. When we started, Caroline, as you mentioned, OZY was an online magazine, and somebody at the time described us as the love child of Vice and The Economist, meaning that hopefully OZY was smart and forward-looking, that we did about a dozen original pieces a day, and people would read our newsletters and come to the site and subscribe to our app and other things. But over the last, I would say 3 years, but really over the last year, we've been doing a lot more with original television. So we've been producing TV, not only for Oprah, but for Hulu and for Lifetime and for A&E and for YouTube and for others. We've been doing a lot with podcasts. I think we find a lot of our audience has kind of gone there. And then I will tell you, one of the craziest things that I did not expect is newsletters. I don't know, Caroline, if you're a newsletter reader, but our newsletter subscription has gone off the charts. We've seen the number of people who read OZY newsletters triple during this pandemic. And today, I think we've got something like 10 million people who are subscribed to the OZY newsletter and get it every day, which, to give you a sense, is more than the Skim, Morning Brew, Hustle, Axios combined.
And what does this newsletter boom really say about just how much information there is out there? People are overwhelmed. How are you meeting that demand and making sure they're not just increasing with more and more things that people have to read?
Well, I think one of the things that we're trying to do with anything we do, whether it's the newsletters or whether it's the TV show or podcast, is you will see that we've been trying to curate and think that less is actually more. And so I think we've always kind of admired what HBO did in its heyday and what Apple has done, which in my mind meant that they cared about quality over quantity. And so that's definitely been true for us. So you'll never see us like some of the outlets do 3,000 stories a day or something like that. I think you're right. That's just, one of our investors has a great phrase for it, Caroline. He calls it infobesity. He just says that we're just drowning in information. And instead, I think we try to give insight if we can, and entertainment as well. And so that's what we've been doing with our newsletters. Our newsletters don't go on and on. They typically make a dozen really good points and you're out. Same thing with our TV shows, same thing with our podcasts.
Well, infobesity is a pretty hard word to say on camera, but I think I'm going to steal it from you, Carlos. I want to go ahead and bring in some members who are joining us in this conversation. Donna says transformative moment, yes. And Sarah says the OZY newsletter is great. I also want to bring back the poll that we have for the members in the stream today and they get Carlos's take on it. How have your news consumptions changed during the pandemic? What types of news are you reading most? Are you focused on your industry? Are you consumed with world events? Are you thinking more about leadership and management or other? Vote right now. Tell us your thoughts behind your vote and we'll reveal the results at the end of the show. Carlos, what's your take? How is this going to net out? And also personally, how have your news consumption habits changed?
Yeah, great question. So I think everybody's focused on politics. This is a big transformative election. Everything's on the ballot, from science to health to race to love to even how we talk to each other, right? So I think that's clearly far and away where we are and where we'll be over the next couple of months. I think for a lot of people, mind, body, and health, and I know that may sound maybe not as hard-edged as some of the other topics on there, but I think that for everybody, Caroline, people are reflecting. They're at home with loved ones or without, and wondering what's the right way forward. And I think people are thinking a lot of big thoughts. So I think that that's a big topic that we personally are seeing at OZY, whether it's on our various television programs or our podcasts or what have you. And then, interestingly enough, and maybe not interesting, maybe it's just the way it is. I think between the recession, but also the soaring stock market, I think there's a lot of interest right now in, I don't know whether to call it entrepreneurialism or getting by or how to make your way forward, but there's a lot of interest in all of those things kind of combined. So those are kind of the three big buckets. In terms of me personally, I still probably consume a fair amount of news in all those categories. I always am interested in leadership. I'm actually probably enjoying a little more entertainment than maybe I did before. So I'm watching shows besides the Carlos Watson show on YouTube. I'm watching shows like Mrs. America on Hulu, which I liked a lot.
You mentioned the increasing demand for news about entrepreneurship, which is definitely something that we're seeing here on LinkedIn. A lot of people going into freelance work or starting their own businesses. You were an anchor at CNN before launching your own business. Any advice for those in the stream who are thinking about launching their own startup right now?
Yeah, I personally love the opportunity to be a part of building something new, but I know it's not for everybody. And so I would say that the good things about starting something new is the idea to bring something you love alive, the chance maybe to work with people you really enjoy and admire, the chance to kind of go from 0 to 100 and actually see something come to fruition, and the chance to be really creative. I think for a lot of people, though, there's a lot of ambiguity, Caroline, when you're starting a company. Will the customer actually buy and when? And even if they buy, when will they pay you? Will the people who you hire to work for you, will they show up? Will they give it their all? Will they be in it to win it? And so I would actually ask people to really think carefully about whether or not they really want to be an entrepreneur and really want to own it. And if indeed they do, then one of the best things I've seen people do is outline a business plan for themselves. Sometimes people jump into a business without a business plan. And I think even the slimmest of a plan that forces you to challenge yourself and put things on paper, I think is a good exercise.
And you, of course, faced your own headwinds when launching your own business. I actually want to bring up a quote that I read on LinkedIn with an interview you had with Adam Bryant. You said, "It's not twice as hard to succeed as non-Blacks. It's literally 100 times as hard. And if you start out thinking that it's twice as hard, that's going to set your expectations, and you're not going to be ready to the fact that if you're going to do something entrepreneurial, it's literally going to be 100 times harder, whether it's raising money, hiring people, or closing deals." Carlos, right now we're just going through this heavy confrontation of systemic racism across our industries. How does that change your statement that you said to Adam Bryant?
I wish I didn't have to say it, Carol. I wish it wasn't true. I'm as much of an optimist as the next person, but and if I'm 100% honest, Caroline, I didn't really even fully admit it to myself until we really were in this moment, because I think there's a part of you that is just trying to survive. It's just trying to make it through. But the more time I've spent looking around, and I was talking to one of the well-known venture capitalists here in the Valley. He's been around for 40 years now. And I was asking him, how many people do you know, how many entrepreneurs do you know that have raised over $100 million or thereabouts? He said, probably 5,000. I said, how many Black entrepreneurs do you know that have done that? He said, I don't know. I said, 5, 10? He said, yeah, I probably know 5. I said, great. Name them for me. He said, well, you. And I said, okay, who else? And he couldn't name anyone else. And when you think about that, I don't think that that's a difference in entrepreneurial interest or desire. I don't think that's a difference in skill, but I think that there is a dramatic difference in opportunity. And I think it's important for young entrepreneurs to know that, because if you don't know that and you're not prepared for how grueling it is, you will constantly beat yourself up. You'll constantly find yourself underprepared and not ready for it. And so, again, I love entrepreneurship. I think it's important. I think it can be creative. It can ultimately be rewarding, but you have to be ready for it. And sadly, today, I think that there is a meaningful difference in the route that African-American entrepreneurs have and others. And I do hope it's one of the things that venture capitalists, that bankers, that policymakers ultimately focus on in a meaningful way. Because I don't think it's a difference of talent, skill, or desire. I think it's a meaningful difference of opportunity.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit more. Of course, Black founders need to be prepared for how challenging the road to raising capital, building a business is going to be. But what needs to happen on the other end, other than your venture capitalist friend maybe knowing more than one Black founder? What needs to change within venture capital in the system right now?
It's interesting. I think one, you have to have more diversity in terms of the actual gatekeepers, the venture capitalists themselves. I think there are lots of folks who look at people who look like them or look like their friendship set, and those are the people that they're happy to invest in, even candidly if the idea is half-baked or sucks, right? But there's just so much comfort there that they will happily pour enormous amounts of money down those drains in some cases. And so I think you need more indifferent people who are the venture capitalists, who are the investors, the angel investors, who are the gatekeepers. That's one. Two is I think there probably are some kind of smart system of boot camps for would-be entrepreneurs. And I know we've got accelerators, and I know things like Y Combinator and 500 Startups have tried to do what they can, not just for entrepreneurs in general, but in some cases for entrepreneurs of color. But I really think there needs to be something that's different and more honest and more rigorous, because I think many of these things pre-Black Lives Matter also live under this fiction that things are roughly equal or it's only a little bit different. And again, if you approach it that way, then you're not actually going to do the things, not only in terms of raising money, but in terms of putting together business plans, in terms of putting together a board, in terms of identifying your first half dozen customers, in terms of thinking about how you hire people, in terms of navigating inevitable disagreements within your company. All of that is hard work, and all of that can play out differently without the right training and guidance. So those are a couple things. The last thing is I think there should be some policy decisions. I think in the same way that Governor Newsom here in California has said that board of directors need to have broader and more inclusive representation, I think that there should be requirements that pension funds and others, you cannot give your money to these various venture capital and investment funds unless they are proving to you that they are broadly investing that. And if they are not going to broadly invest it, that's fine. But certainly the government involved pension funds like teachers funds and firefighters funds and police funds, which, by the way, a lot of their money comes from Black and brown people who worked for years and put their money in those pension funds. Those pension funds shouldn't be allowed to turn around and invest those in venture capital funds that have horrific track records in terms of supporting high quality entrepreneurs of color, particularly Black founders.
You're right. I think these checks and balances are so necessary, particularly during this time. I'm going to go ahead and say hello to some more members who are joining us in the stream. Gaines from Canada, Ahmet from Turkey, Kevin from New York City. Thanks for joining us on LinkedIn News Live. Stephanie says, Carlos, fantastic advice. And we have a question here from Stephen that I want to get to. He wants to know, what advice do you have to large media outlets on pivoting to what their audiences are asking for?
Yeah, I think that is so interesting. I mean, I think one of the folks who's done it best are the folks at the New York Times, Mark Thompson, the outgoing CEO, and Meredith Levian, who's taken over as new CEO, are both good friends. And I've watched both of them over the last 5 or 6 years turn that from an old school print business to one that is digitally savvy, that has begun to do more with podcasts, begun to do a little bit with TV. And so I think you can do it. I think you probably have to have a core of change agents. So I don't think it's enough to just have one person, the CEO, but you probably need to have a half dozen or so. You probably have to have an external facilitator who's really going to encourage some of those hard choices, because especially when you're these large companies, Caroline, you've had so much success, someone telling you that you need to be meaningfully different, you're like, yeah, right, I'm good, right? Like we're making it as we are. And you might see the slow decline, but you never think you're going to become BlackBerry, right? You never think you're going to become Motorola or any of the others that kind of go from relevant to irrelevant in what seems like a heartbeat. So I think those are a couple of the things that are important. Having a group of change agents, not just one, having an external facilitator, and probably having a relatively dedicated period of time in which there's large agreement to make a substantial shift.
And speaking of doing things differently, you've recently started to stretch your arm in scripted television. Maybe after the show, you can give me, I'm so curious about how that's different than what you and I do for a living. Tell us a little bit more about the impetus behind this story of this woman who loses her daughter at the border. Why did you choose that? What was the inspiration?
Well, as you're saying, OZY's done a lot in terms of documentaries for the History Channel or talk shows for YouTube or interesting series for Hulu or these town halls for Oprah. But the idea of moving into the space of Peaky Blinders and The Fall and, The Godfather of Harlem and all these kind of interesting, what we call scripted shows, was one that I'd always kind of harbored, because clearly I'm a consumer of these kinds of good shows and was excited about that. And so when I had the chance to talk to Paul Buccieri, the CEO at A&E Networks, which includes Lifetime, and Tanya Lopez, who leads the Lifetime movie group there, I think we all agreed that there was something powerful in the story of children on the border who were being separated from their parents. And that story really hadn't been fully told in a kind of Lifetime movie format. And we thought, if ever there was an opportunity to bring the powerful issues of immigration, of race, of family separation, of government policy together, that now is the time to do it, that it still was a very resonant issue. And so we had done a fair amount of reporting over the last couple of years on it. We had talked to children, in particular, one young woman and her mother who had been separated. We had talked to some of the lawyers who had been involved in some of the lawsuits there. We had talked to some of the officials in the Trump administration. And so we talked to people on all parts of that conversation. We brought it together in a really interesting script. And as I said, took it to Paul Buccieri and Tanya Lopez, who were part of the A&E and Lifetime families. And to their credit, they saw a big opportunity there. And I'm really pleased that we were able to announce that as one of our 2 new scripted series.
Well, you're telling such critical stories, and we tend to have a lot of job seekers joining us here on LinkedIn News Live. Is OZY hiring, and if so, for what roles, and what do you look for in candidates to join your media company?
Yeah, we are hiring in targeted and strategic ways, but we're hiring. We are certainly hiring more people as we build out our television effort and our television group. And so some of those are people who work on sets with us, whether on camera or makeup or in other parts of the business. Some of those are writers and researchers. And so we're looking for folks in that space. We're looking for people on the sales side as well. As we launch not only our television, podcast, and digital businesses, we're looking for advertisers and underwriters to support all of those. And so really good salespeople who can work with those folks, we think are really important. And account managers who, once we begin to work with them, that's an important piece of it too. And then last but not least, we are beginning to do yet more in audio. And for us, interestingly enough, Caroline, that no longer simply means podcast, but guess what's back? Good old-fashioned radio. And so we just launched a new global radio show to 97 million listeners in collaboration with the BBC World Service. And so it's a weekly show. And so we're also hiring folks who can help us build out our podcast and radio effort as well.
That reminds me, I really have to figure out my podcast consumption strategy, because I used to do it on my commute, but I don't have my commute anymore. When are you listening to podcasts?
You know what? I do the most boring but effective thing in the world, which is I ride that boring ass, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say it, but I ride the stationary bike, Caroline, every morning. And that is 0% fun. It's not as fun as playing pickup basketball. And if anyone who's watching this is a good pickup basketball player, that's another thing that we're hiring for. No, just kidding. But I will challenge you to a game. But that's when I do it. I do it when I ride the stationary bike. There's a really good one. I'm guilty. It's from OZY, but but there's a really good one called Flashback. That's about kind of unusual threads in history, Caroline, that you wouldn't expect, things that are connected that seem seemingly disconnected, and that's been one of my new passions.
Well, I'm a Peloton gal, so unfortunately I can't take you up on that offer, but maybe the next time I go on a run, I will check out that podcast.
Are you a Robin girl, or who do you ride with?
Robin, True and True, and then Allie Love, definitely. We had Robin on one of our podcasts recently, and I got the pleasure of sitting down with Allie Love before the pandemic, so definitely those two are my favorite.
Nice. Yeah. They do a good job. They've built out a really interesting team of people. Talk about interesting hiring and interesting growth during a difficult window.
We'll talk about interesting content. I mean, media businesses, they're booming. Anyway, Carlos, this has been such a great conversation. I've learned so much personally, and I see our stream is just loving it. Fred says, you've motivated me throughout your speech. It's encouraging to entrepreneurs. Stephanie says, thanks for the advice, Carlos. And we just appreciate all the critical stories you're telling and for joining us on LinkedIn News Live.
Totally my pleasure, Caroline. Thanks for joining me. And I love what you guys do here. So thank you for making this possible.
That was Carlos Watson, the CEO of OZY Media, really giving us a full-ranging conversation of how he's growing his media business during this challenging time. I want to thank him for joining us on the show. And now I want to reveal the results of the poll that we had for you in the stream today. I'm very curious to see what the results are. It looks like, wow, almost half of you, as Carlos rightly predicted, are consuming more politics news right now. Votes from Jean, Kevin, and Emma. Some of you are focused on industry, Christine and Martha, where Carl is catching up on his leadership and management. Sort of some comments from the poll. Dolores says, both industry and politics are important in this time. Andrea also says that focusing on her industry, but also what is going on in the world. Thank you all for joining us and for voting in the poll today. We'll be back with you tomorrow at 12 Eastern, where I'm going to be sitting down with shoe designer Steve Madden. We'll have a wide-ranging conversation about his career and his new book, The Cobbler. I'm Caroline Fairchild. Thank you so much for joining us.